Hey, going Radiant. This is Radiant Virtue Ministries, and we are in the book of Esther. We're heading into chapter 7. If you've been following along, great. If not, there are earlier videos that you can go back and revisit. But we're going to keep the story rolling because we're heading towards the end. It's getting really, really good. We just got out of chapter 6, where Queen Esther has hosted the first night of a banquet that she's hosting for her husband, King Xerxes, and his right-hand man, Haman. We're picking up into night 2 of the banquet of wine. Let's see where this leads. Chapter 7, it says, so the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. Haman is feeling like so good about himself right now because he's like, I'm on night 2 of the most famous people in all the land. I am so awesome that I would be honored this way because he thinks so highly of himself, right? It says, and the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to half of the kingdom. Half of the kingdom would be a lot because remember, the kingdom basically is like India all the way to Ethiopia. Okay, homeboy runs, I think it was the most populated provinces of all the land. I think it was up to 50 million people at the time it said. So he is saying like, you can basically have whatever you like. He's being a good husband here. So she says, well, then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request. For we are sold, and I and my people to be destroyed, to be slain and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Xerxes answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he and where is he that just presume in his heart to do so? So she's saying like, if we were just being sold into slavery, fine, whatever, that's purposeful. But the fact is we're being we're basically being sold into a genocide. We're about to be killed off. And he's like, well, by who? Who's doing this? Like, where is this guy? Let me go after him. He's probably still putting the pieces together because this is a big turn of events in the midst of this fancy banquet, I imagine. So Esther says, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and queen. Yeah, he was. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make his request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. He knows the king. He knows what the king is capable of. He knows how to motivate the king to get what he wants. And just a few moments ago, he was getting the king to take out and give permission to off Mordecai, right? So if that wrath can go one way, hey, it can be stirred the other way. And now he is scared because he doesn't have control anymore. Haman has lost control. It's a really good place to be in for us as we continue with the story. Because here it says, then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine. And Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out to the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Okay, so it said that this is where Haman is asking for mercy. He is pleading for his life. Mind you, he has been drinking. I don't think it's called a banquet of wine because they had like just like a tippy toe of wine. I think they're pretty drunk at this point. This is a pagan environment, and they're in good spirits, allegedly, which really is just Esther lubricating them to then later ask this request, which worked out perfect, as we can see here. So, but the king walks in, and he's like, I think he's probably assuming that he's probably like trying to assault or do who knows what to the queen, which is not okay. So the king's, as the words went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Okay, so they bag over his head. They're walking him out. And Harbonah, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold, also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. So we just saw a huge reversal. God takes this plot against the Jews and that Haman conjured up, and now Haman's made this horrible error in judgment, horrible plot. It's been exposed. The queen's in on it. He went to Esther's bedroom. He goes to beg for his life. The king, interrupts this act as like evil, thinking that she's probably about to be assaulted. Hello. And he is not down with that. So he is like, you're not molesting the queen. That's like the final straw. Like, bad, bad, bad. Okay, Haman, you're done. And the king authorizes Haman to be hanged on his own gallows. On his own gallows. I just want to say here that there are moments in our lives where we seek justice. There are things being done against us, and we don't have the control to see things reversed in our favor. But God literally holds the scales of everything over our life. There is not one situation that you've seen injustice in or been a victim to that God does not see. And he's not a blind God. He is an all-seeing God. He's omnipresent. And he is clearly here on every single page of every chapter of the book of Esther, even though he's not mentioned once. And that's because he is so good. Even when we don't see it, he is working. And he was working behind the scenes the whole time, because every drop of this story mattered in this moment at the banquet. Because if Esther hadn't obeyed the prompting of Mordecai, her adopted dad, to say, like, I think you're the person to do this, like, go before your husband, approach the throne, ask for favor, use wisdom and discernment and how you're going to do that. She fasts, she prays, she does what she needs to do in the spirit realm in order to activate what needs to be done in the natural realm. And yet all of that wisdom plays out and pairs well with Mordecai protecting the king originally from the plot to have him killed by the two kingsmen that were supposed to, take out the king. Mordecai does his job, and he is forgotten at the time. But God didn't not see him. He just saved it for later. And maybe that's something for you. Maybe he is just saving something, a divine turnaround in your life for later. It's going to be played out at the perfect time, a kairos moment, which is what we see here. So it's a really great story of just how, one, a woman uses discernment, wisdom, the fruit of what she has to offer, which is her beauty, her kindness, preparing a beautiful feast for a man, flattery, I'm sure that did not hurt, and she primes him with wine. There's probably wisdom in that too in these circumstances. This is a pagan king, so I think setting him in a good spirit before asking him for the big ask and exposing someone that he trusts. She had to really make sure that he really thought highly of her, and clearly he did. Esther was chosen out of, I think, 1,500 women, and it was after they each spent a night with the king. Now, that night with the king in a pagan environment, and these girls were like preteen age, like 12 to 14 virgins. Some would say it was human trafficking. It's really sad, but unfortunately, that's just how it was. But Esther was chosen out of all these girls, and if the girls weren't selected, they were added to the concubine, which basically just it just took an entire generation of young girls away from being productive in society after the king had them. And so the fact that Esther was selected out of this entire process, even though we don't like it, it's uncomfortable to even think about that that's what she had to go to get to where she was. There were millions of Jews that this has impacted ongoingly, even in present time, that goes back all the way to the days of Esther, all because of her courage and her strength and her using the gifts that the Lord gave her in order to savvily go and with courage and boldness to ask for and to request on behalf of her people, not just her life, but her people, and ends up saving him. And we're at the part of the story that's so good because Haman is no more. He literally just got taken out in the gallows that he had built for Mordecai. And just in an instant, everything changes. Everything is overturned. So just sit on that, marinate in that. We're going to roll back into chapter 8. We're going to wrap this up pretty quick. These are short chapters, but I just want you to see at the end of this just how good God is. And I just want to remind you that he is over all of your circumstances as well. So I'll see you in chapter 8.